They didn't argue. They didn't explain. They didn't make a scene. They just stopped being there the same way. Same messages, same voice, same presence. But something was missing. And you felt it. That quiet distance. That subtle shift. That moment where you realized they were no longer fully with you. And you still don't understand why. But here's what most people miss. Empaths don't disappear suddenly. They disappear after something inside them changes. And this is where everything changes. Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what causes that shift. Not the obvious mistakes, not the loud conflicts, but the quiet patterns that slowly disconnect them without you ever noticing. And I need to warn you, because once you see this, you won't just understand why they left. You'll start recognizing when it's already happening again. Now, think about this for a moment. There's always that one person. They don't demand attention. They don't chase validation. But when they're with you, you feel understood, seen, heard, not because they say the perfect words, but because they notice things others miss. The pauses, the tone, the shift in your energy. And then one day, they feel different, still there, but not the same. Still responding, but without depth. And slowly, they disappear. If this is already hitting close to home, type 1 in the comments. Not for engagement, but because recognizing it means you've experienced something most people never fully understand. Now, here's where things go deeper, because an empath is not just someone who feels more. That's too simple. An empath processes emotional information differently. They don't just hear what you say. They register what you don't say. They notice patterns, consistency, inconsistency. Even silence means something to them. And this is the part no one tells you. Their brain doesn't store isolated moments. It stores emotional patterns. How you respond over time, how you show up consistently. And once that pattern becomes clear, their behavior changes. Not dramatically, not immediately, but quietly. And this is where the first shift happens. You dismiss something they feel, not intentionally, not aggressively, just casually. They open up and you respond logically. They share something real and you minimize it slightly. You don't reject them, but you don't meet them either. And to you, it feels normal. But to them, something feels off. And this is where everything starts to build. They don't react. They don't confront you. They observe. Because one moment doesn't define a pattern, but repetition does. So it happens again and again. And each time, something inside them adjusts. They share less. They explain less. They expect less. Not because they don't care, but because they're learning how their emotional reality is received. And this is the part most people miss. When an empath pulls back, it's not because they feel less. It's because they felt too much for too long without being met the same way. But here's what most people miss. Emotional dismissal is only the beginning. Because once that pattern is established, something deeper starts to happen. You begin using subtle pressure, not obvious manipulation, but emotional weight, small statements. I guess I care more than you. You've changed. You're distant lately. And on the surface, they sound like feelings. But underneath, they shift responsibility. And this is where everything changes. Because now, instead of evaluating you, they start evaluating themselves. Am I not showing up enough? Did I do something wrong? Am I overreacting? And this is where the damage deepens. Because once an empath starts questioning their own emotional accuracy, their internal stability shifts. They begin adjusting, trying harder, giving more, explaining more. And for a while, it works. Things feel normal again. But here's the part no one tells you. That stability is temporary because the pattern hasn't changed. Only their behavior has, and eventually the same cycle repeats. And this is where the next layer appears. Boundaries, not loud ones, not clearly stated limits, but internal lines that define what feels safe. And slowly, those lines begin to move. You interrupt more. You expect more access. You push slightly further, and each moment feels small. Not enough to confront, so they let it pass. But the brain doesn't ignore repeated discomfort. It adapts to it. And adaptation creates distance. Not physical, emotional. They start holding back, filtering themselves, thinking before they speak. And this is where everything becomes dangerous. Because they are no longer showing up as themselves. They are showing up as what feels acceptable. And this is the part most people never see. You didn't lose the empath. You lost the version of them that felt safe being real with you. But here's what most people miss. Even at this stage, they're still there, still trying, still hoping, because something is still unresolved. And unresolved emotion keeps people connected longer than clarity does. Now, here's where everything shifts. The moment effort stops feeling natural and starts feeling like work, internal work, they begin thinking more, analyzing conversations, replaying interactions, trying to understand the pattern, and this is where emotional exhaustion begins. Not suddenly, but gradually, and this is the part no one tells you. The more an empath thinks about a connection, the more drained they become. Because they're not just feeling it, they're trying to make sense of it. And when something doesn't make sense, the brain keeps trying to resolve it. Again and again and again until it can't anymore. And this is where the shift happens. They don't leave suddenly. They leave after they already left emotionally. And this is where everything changes. Because once emotional detachment begins, the connection fades from the inside. Not from lack of care, but from lack of safety. And here's what most people miss. When an empath stops feeling safe, they stop investing. Not loudly, quietly. They respond less. They explain less. They engage less. And from the outside, it looks like distance. But internally, it's clarity. Now, let's go deeper for a moment. Because this is not just emotional. It's neurological. The brain stores emotional patterns in networks. Every interaction adds to that pattern. And over time, the brain builds a prediction model. This is how this person makes me feel. And once that model stabilizes, the brain stops expecting change. And this is where the final shift happens. The empath stops trying to fix the connection. Not because they don't care, but because their brain has already categorized it. And once something is categorized as emotionally unsafe, the brain reduces attachment to protect itself. Now let's shift perspective. If you're the one who lost an empath, you might think they changed, that they became distant. But that's not what happened. They became aware. And awareness changes everything. Because once someone sees the pattern clearly, they can't participate the same way anymore. And if you're the empath, that moment, that quiet realization, this doesn't feel right anymore. And from that moment, everything changes. You stop trying to fix it. You stop explaining. You stop chasing clarity. And slowly you disappear. Not to punish, but to protect your own clarity. Empaths don't need perfection. They don't need constant attention. They need honesty, consistency, emotional safety. And if you can't give them that, they won't stay long enough to explain why.